What if the biggest story in the WNBA right now isn't about a game, a playoff race, or even a rivalry? What if it's about the growing feeling that the league's biggest star and her own organization might not be on the same page anymore? For months, fans have been noticing little moments. Not one massive scandal. Not one explosive press conference. Just a series of events that, when put together, have created a debate that refuses to go away. And now, with emotions running high and social media dissecting every move, people are asking a question that would have sounded impossible just a year ago. Is Caitlin Clark truly getting everything she needs from the Indiana Fever? The conversation didn't start because of a trade rumor. It didn't start because of a contract dispute. It started because fans began paying attention to how Clark's biggest performances were being discussed. Every time she delivered a huge game, social media exploded. Every time she broke another record, headlines followed. But some supporters felt there was a disconnect between what they were watching and how those performances were being celebrated. They saw historic stat lines, game-changing plays, and moments that had entire arenas standing. Yet after some games, many fans left feeling like the spotlight had somehow shifted elsewhere. Whether that perception was fair or not didn't matter. The feeling was growing, and once that seed was planted, people started looking closer at everything. Then the coaching debate arrived, and that's when things became even more intense. Basketball fans love arguing about systems, strategies, and philosophies. It's one of the oldest debates in sports. Should a team adapt to its superstar, or should the superstar adapt to the team? In Indiana's case, that question suddenly became impossible to avoid. Clark built her reputation playing fast, creating chaos for defenses, pushing the pace, and launching shots from distances that most players wouldn't even consider. That's part of what made her must-watch television. But some fans believed the Fever weren't always maximizing those strengths. They felt the offense occasionally slowed down when it should have sped up. They felt opportunities were being left on the table. Others pushed back, arguing that winning basketball requires balance and structure. The result was a fan base split right down the middle. One side believed Clark needed more freedom, the other believed development takes time. And while that argument continued, another piece of evidence entered the conversation. The numbers. Because no matter how people feel about Caitlin Clark, the audience figures are impossible to ignore. Everywhere she goes, attention follows. Television ratings jump. Arenas sell out. Merchandise flies off shelves. Casual sports fans who rarely watch the WNBA suddenly know exactly when the Fever are playing. That's not an opinion. That's reality. Clark arrived carrying expectations unlike almost any rookie in league history, and somehow she exceeded them. Every major appearance felt bigger. Every nationally televised game felt more important. Supporters pointed to those numbers and argued that Indiana was benefiting from a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. Critics responded that basketball is still a team sport, and no player should be treated differently simply because they're popular. But regardless of which side people chose, one thing became clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another player. She had become the center of gravity for nearly every conversation surrounding the league. And once a player reaches that level of fame, every decision becomes a story. A missed shot becomes a debate. A substitution becomes a debate. A late-game play call becomes a debate. Fans started analyzing possessions frame by frame. Why didn't Clark get the ball there? Why was that play designed that way? Why wasn't she taking more shots? Why was someone else handling the final possession? Questions that normally disappear after a game suddenly lived online for days. That's the reality of being the face of a sport. Every choice gets magnified. Every mistake gets replayed. Every success gets scrutinized. The pressure isn't just on the player anymore. It's on coaches, teammates, executives, and everyone connected to the organization. And with that pressure came something else, growing frustration from portions of the fan base. What made the situation even more complicated was the battle happening off the court. Sports media personalities began taking sides. Some argued that Clark wasn't receiving enough recognition for what she was doing. Others argued that her supporters were turning every basketball decision into a controversy. Every interview became content. Every quote became ammunition. Social media clips spread faster than ever. A comment that might have gone unnoticed years ago suddenly generated millions of views. Fans dissected body language. They analyzed reactions. They searched. The moment fans started talking about Caitlin Clark's future, something interesting happened. The conversation stopped being about one game, one coach, or one decision. It became about power. Not power in the traditional sports sense, not points, rebounds, or assists, the kind of power that changes business decisions. The kind of power that forces organizations to look in the mirror and ask difficult questions. Because whether people like hearing it or not, there are very few athletes in any sport today who can move an audience the way Caitlin Clark can. You can see it everywhere. Look at road games. Look at ticket prices. Look at television ratings. Teams that normally struggled to draw national attention suddenly found themselves playing in packed arenas whenever Indiana came to town. Entire cities treated Fever games like special events. Fans showed up hours early. Merchandise disappeared from shelves. Broadcasters promoted games weeks in advance. That doesn't happen by accident. And that's why many supporters have become increasingly protective of Clark. They don't see her as just another star player. They see her as someone carrying an enormous amount of responsibility for the growth of the sport itself. Fair or unfair, that perception has created expectations unlike anything the WNBA has experienced before. But with greater visibility comes greater criticism, and Clark learned that almost immediately. Every turnover became a headline. Every shooting slump became a discussion. Every hard foul became a national debate. For most young players, mistakes disappear after the final buzzer. For Clark, mistakes often live online for days, sometimes weeks. That's the price of becoming the center of attention. The spotlight that helps build your reputation can also magnify every flaw. What's remarkable is how often she has responded. When critics questioned whether her game would translate to the professional level, she answered on the court. When people claimed the physicality would overwhelm her, she adjusted. When opponents tried to make life difficult, she kept producing. And each time she answered one criticism, another one appeared. That cycle never really stopped. Which brings us to one of the most fascinating parts of this entire story, the rivalry between expectation and reality. Because expectations for Caitlin Clark were never normal. Most rookies enter the league hoping to contribute. Most young stars hope to become all-stars. Clark entered with people wondering if she could transform an entire league. Think about how absurd that sounds. That's not a basketball expectation. That's a cultural expectation. And yet somehow many people genuinely expected her to accomplish exactly that. The result is a situation where even success sometimes gets treated like failure. A 25-point game becomes a discussion about why she didn't score 35. A win becomes a debate about strategy. A record-breaking performance becomes an argument about recognition. The bar keeps moving. And that's one reason emotions surrounding the Fever continue running so high, because everyone watching feels like they're witnessing something important. The organization knows it. The league knows it. The fans definitely know it. What nobody seems to agree on is what should happen next. Some believe Indiana needs to completely reshape everything around Clark's strengths. Others argue that building a championship team requires compromise from everyone, including superstars. Neither side is likely to change its mind anytime soon. And that's exactly why every Fever game feels like it's carrying extra weight. A normal possession suddenly feels significant. A coaching decision feels symbolic. A substitution becomes controversial. Everything means more because fans believe the stakes are bigger than a single season. Then there's another reality nobody talks about enough. Pressure changes organizations. When millions of people are watching, mistakes become harder to hide. When national media starts paying attention, every quote gets examined. When expectations rise, patience usually disappears. We've seen it happen across sports countless times. Teams that once operated quietly suddenly find themselves under a microscope. Front offices face tougher questions. Coaches face greater scrutiny. Players feel additional pressure. The Fever are experiencing that reality right now. Whether they're winning or losing, people are paying attention. A lot of people. And that attention isn't going away anytime soon. In fact, it might only be getting started. Because the next chapter of Clark's career could be even bigger than the first. The WNBA is growing. Expansion is coming. Television audiences continue increasing. Corporate interest continues increasing. Investment continues increasing. And at the center of many of those conversations sits the same player who has dominated headlines since arriving. But here's where the story takes an even more surprising turn. While fans continue debating coaches, systems, and front office decisions, Caitlin Clark has quietly been doing something that might be more important than anything happening on the court. She's changing expectations. Think about it. Just a few years ago, a regular season WNBA game drawing national attention was considered a huge success. Now fans expect massive audiences. They expect sold-out arenas. They expect national headlines after every Fever game. And whether people want to admit it or not, a huge part of that shift traces back to one player. That's why every discussion surrounding Clark feels bigger than basketball. When she has a great game, people don't just talk about the box score. They talk about television ratings. They talk about league growth. They talk about future expansion. They talk about sponsorships. They talk about the future of women's sports. That's an incredible amount of pressure for any athlete to carry, and yet somehow she keeps delivering. What's even more impressive is that the pressure doesn't seem to be slowing down. If anything, it's getting heavier. Because now fans aren't just asking whether Clark can become one of the league's best players. Many are asking whether she can become one of the most influential athletes the sport has ever seen. That's a completely different conversation, and it's one that creates even more challenges moving forward. Every superstar eventually reaches a point where expectations become almost impossible to satisfy. Win a game? People expect you to win by more. Break a record? People immediately ask about the next one. Become the face of a league? People start expecting you to solve every problem within it. That's the reality Clark is facing right now. The standard keeps rising. And the higher it rises, the more every decision matters. That's why so many fans have become obsessed with what happens next in Indiana. Not because of rumors, not because of gossip, because they understand how important the next chapter could be. The Fever aren't just building around a talented player. They're building around one of the most recognizable athletes in North American sports. That changes everything. It changes timelines, it changes expectations, and it changes the margin for error. Organizations can survive mistakes when nobody is watching. They can't afford many mistakes when the entire sports world is paying attention. And make no mistake, the sports world is watching. Analysts are watching. Sponsors are watching. Television executives are watching. Other teams are watching. Everyone wants to know what happens next. Can Indiana turn this attention into a championship contender? Can the organization build a roster capable of matching the expectations surrounding its superstar? Can they create an environment that allows Clark to reach another level? Those questions aren't going away. In fact, they may define the next several years of WNBA history, because the league is entering a period unlike anything it's experienced before. More viewers, more money, more attention, more scrutiny. Everything is getting bigger. And when a sport enters that kind of growth phase, certain players become symbols of the entire movement. Fair or unfair, Clark has become one of those symbols, which means every success gets magnified, but every setback gets magnified too. That's why some of the reactions surrounding the Fever can seem so extreme. Fans aren't just reacting to a single possession. They're reacting to what they believe is at stake. To them, every game feels like another chapter in a much larger story. A story about the future of the league. A story about how stars should be treated. A story about whether organizations can keep pace with the moment. And that brings us to the question nobody seems able to answer. What happens if Clark's best basketball is still ahead of her? Because that's the possibility that should make every opponent nervous. Remember, despite all the records, all the attention, and all the headlines, she's still incredibly early in her professional career. Most players are still figuring things out at this stage. Most players are still adjusting. Most players are still learning. Yet Clark is already producing moments that dominate sports conversations. Imagine what happens when experience catches up with talent. Imagine what happens when every read becomes quicker, every pass becomes sharper, every decision becomes easier. That's a frightening thought for the rest of the league, and it's one reason so many people believe the biggest chapters of this story haven't happened yet. Because the player everyone is talking about today may not even be the final version of Caitlin Clark, not even close. The records could grow, the audiences could grow, the influence could grow, and if that happens, the discus,